Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up, and make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and with Black Adam coming out soon, and that movie featuring Dr. Fate, over the course of the next however long this video ends up being, I'm going to make you an expert on Kent Nelson. But before we do, let's do a brand integration. Okay, so we have our disc plates set up here, and I actually kind of need to fix that one and that one. My OCD is driving me crazy. But we've got these things set up. I need to get a sixth one. I only got 5, but these things look dope. And like we said in the last video, these things literally attach just using these magnets to stick to sticky paper, right? So you don't have to worry about tearing up the wall when you attach these things. But there's something else that I want to point out here. So one thing to remember is that these things are metal, right? Like these things are branded metal designs. So it's not like you're gonna have problems with them in like 10 years. These things are solid. They also have artists all over the world. So for those of you guys who aren't just interested in Marvel Comics, but you're also interested in like nature, landscapes, different things like that, you can go to their website and you can organize it based on genre or look up things based on genre, or you can look up things based on just strict individual brands. So if all you want is Star Wars, you can find Star Wars. So just like last time, the discount code is that you get 25% off for 1 or 2 plates, or you can get 29% off for 3 plates or more. So make sure you guys check the link in the description. Make sure you guys go check out this plate, and let's get back into the video. Kent Nelson, also known as the first Dr. Fate, was created by Gardner Fox and Howard Sherman and first appeared in More Fun Comics number 55 in May of 1940, but we didn't really get any information into the character's origin until about a year later in More Fun Comics number 67. But in that story, it's essentially established that in 1920, Kent Nelson went on an archaeological expedition with his father to the Valley of Ur, where he discovered a temple containing the tomb of Nabu the Wise, who was an ancient Mesopotamian god. Now, when Kent unwittingly awakens Nabu, a poisonous gas is released, and then Kent's father is essentially killed. Now, Nabu, of course, feels bad for Kent, and so he takes him under his wing, and over the course of the next 2 decades, essentially teaches him everything that Nabu knows about the mystic arts, and then gives him an amulet, a helm, and a cloak that imbue him with vast magical abilities. And so Kent basically then returns to America, sets up base in Salem, Massachusetts, and operates as a superhero known as Dr. Fate. Now, later in 1940, National Allied Publications and All American Publications, the 2 companies that would later merge to form DC Comics, collaborated on the introduction of the first team of superheroes in comic book history known as the Justice Society of America, which debuted in All-Star Comics number 3. Now, I do have a video that does explain the Justice Society of America. You're welcome to check it out after you're done watching this video. We'll have a link to it down in the description. But the thing about this is that while these 2 companies would eventually merge, the truth is that the JSA was actually their experiment to see whether or not it was even worth merging in the first place. And so the way this played out is that Dr. Fate was one of the founding members of the team alongside the Spectre, Hourman, and the Sandman, who were on the National Allied Publication side, as well as the Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman, and the Atom from the All-American Publication side. Now, the Justice Society proved to be hugely popular with fans, and Dr. Fate actually continued to appear in their stories up until issue number 21 of All-Star Comics in 1944, which was around the same time that his solo series had basically been canceled as well. Now, there's a reason for this, the reason simply being that superheroes rose to prominence in the 1940s because of World War II. And so you saw pretty much all the superheroes, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Dr. Fate and the JSA were really no different, facing off against the Axis powers. The problem with this is that by the time World War II ended, people were just tired of conflict, and they considered pretty much all superheroes to be synonymous with World War II, so they basically just stopped reading them. Now, some of the superheroes survived. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, those mainstays, they survived because they were just that popular. But somebody like Kent Nelson, Dr. Fate, he wasn't really so fortunate. Now, one thing that I want to establish is that it wasn't as though he was wiped from existence from DC Comics, that he actually appeared sparingly throughout the next couple of decades, most notably in the annual crossovers that took place between the Justice Society and DC's other major superhero team, the Justice League of America, which basically started happening in 1963. He teamed up with Superman a couple of times in the World's Finest comics, and he had like a 1-issue solo story in 1975, but by and large, he was just kept on the shelf. Like DC just kind of shelved him and just sort of walked away. Now, there was an attempt in 1980 with DC Special Series number 10 to give him a new origin, but the only reason why that happened is because prior to that, DC had actually given new origins to other superheroes whose sales were basically struggling. Superman was a good example of that. And so DC's assumption was if it worked for a lot of these other characters, it might very well work for Dr. Fate. It didn't. It didn't really work for Dr. Fate at all. And so in the mid-1980s, in 1985, DC wrote a story called Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, the basis behind this story was because DC's multiverse, which was established in 1961 with the Flash of Two Worlds story, it had just become ridiculously unruly and convoluted, and it made it almost impossible for anybody who had never read comics to get into the DC comic landscape. Now, the significance behind Crisis on Infinite Earths is that it took the entirety of the multiverse that DC had and it condensed it down into a singular universe. The problem that you had to answer here was that if by this point in time it was established that Dr. Fate and the Justice Society of America existed in an alternate reality called Earth 2, and that the Justice League of America was in an alternate reality called Earth 1, how in the world do you square that circle? How do you establish, or how do you continue on the stories of a team that exists in a universe that doesn't exist anymore? Well, this was answered in a story that DC wrote called The Last Days of the JSA, which basically killed them all off. And so post-Crisis, what they did is they gave new origins to effectively almost all the members of the JSA that they didn't kill, with the exception of Dr. Fate. Instead, what they did is they wrote a 4-issue story that was actually written by J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen, which basically killed off the character of Kent Nelson and then set Nabu, the Mesopotamian god, on the path of trying to find a replacement. Now, over the course of the next, like 30 years, there were several different versions of Dr. Fate, which we're not going to go in depth here. You had Eric Strauss and then his stepmom Linda, who were basically merged into a singular person, and they operated as kind of a merger that became Dr. Fate. Eventually, the Eric Strauss character died, and so Linda took up the mantle of Dr. Fate by herself for a short period of time. There was a point where Kent Nelson's dead wife was resurrected from the dead, and she became Dr. Fate. That didn't last very long. You had a guy named Jared Stevens who played the role of Dr. Fate, and then you had a guy named Kent V. Nelson, who was actually the nephew of the original Kent Nelson, Dr. Fate. But the reality here is that Dr. Fate, as we know him, played by Kent Nelson, didn't really resurface in any meaningful and measurable way until DC's relaunch/reboot in 2011 with the New 52. Now, the New 52 was not exactly like the original Crisis on Infinite Earths. It wasn't exactly one of these things where like it was a wholesale reworking of the multiverse and all that kind of stuff. It was to a degree, but it was really more of a lot of the superheroes in DC's lineup basically getting new origin stories, and DC treating superheroes as if they'd only existed for 5 years, as opposed to this great big huge sprawling history. Now, for Dr. Fate himself, his title didn't actually come back until 2015, but even then, it wasn't really Kent Nelson. The way this worked out is that the mantle of Dr. Fate is actually held by an Egyptian-American grad student named Khalid Nassour, and the way this is played is that Khalid is essentially given the helm of fate by the Egyptian goddess Bastet, and at first is depicted as being significantly weaker than past versions of Dr. Fate. However, it's later revealed that Khalid's mother is the niece of Kent Nelson, and that Kent Nelson himself would actually return and serve as the mentor of Khalid while the two of them operated side by side, both of them sharing the mantle of Dr. Fate. Now, during DC's Rebirth event, and DC Rebirth was a very interesting situation because when DC launched the New 52, in a lot of ways, it pissed off a lot of comic book fans because a lot of the history that they'd read before the New 52 was just wiped away. And so DC Rebirth was designed to bring back a lot of that history that had been removed and then merge it with the stories as they'd been told following the New 52. So if it seems a little wild and murky and just kind of a huge mess, it was. And it still is. It's still just a continuity mess. But with regards to the DC Rebirth event, Dr. Fate actually had a huge role in Justice League Dark under the DC Rebirth banner. Now, for those of you guys who didn't hear of Justice League Dark, it was a really cool line of comics that they basically split the Justice League into several teams. But Justice League Dark essentially focused on like the magic and mysticism side, the darker side. But this comic line actually saw Nabu possess Kent Nelson's body and then trap Khalid in a vase. But after he was freed by the Justice League Dark, he ended up playing a key role in helping to defeat Nabu and then free Kent Nelson of his control, resulting in both Kent and Khalid agreeing to shelve the Dr. Fate mantle while serving as magical advisors to the Justice League Dark team. Now, of course, that didn't really last very long, and both Khalid and Kent Nelson would take up the mantle once again, largely because fans just wanted to see them come back. However, Kent is killed in battle with a being that's known as the Upside Down Man when he essentially sacrifices himself to produce a spell powerful enough to weaken the Upside Down Man, which was enough for his teammates to ultimately defeat him. This leaves Khalid as the sole Dr. Fate in DC Comics, which is actually where we are right now. That Kent Nelson is not the main Dr. Fate, which I know probably sounds disappointing if you are interested in the character from DC Comics and you want to go read about Kent Nelson. You're not going to see him right now, at least not as Dr. Fate, but that's kind of where we are here at the moment. That's one of the big things to contend with here. DC's continuity is a nightmare in so many different ways. So trying to take a character like Dr. Fate, who's been around as long as he has, and condense it down into a digestible video can be a bit of a chore. But hopefully this video served its purpose, and hopefully you walk away with a much better understanding of Dr. Fate. Let me know down in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.